In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love.
Hello, 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 everyone. Thank you, DJ Moore, Love and Joy, for setting the vibe off for us tonight. Hi, everyone. I'm Risa Nelson, and I serve as Assistant Dean of Yale College and Director of the Afro-American Cultural Center at Yale, which we affectionately call the House. On behalf of the Planning Committee, comprised of students and staff from the House and the Asian American Cultural Center, we welcome all of you, students, faculty, staff, alumni, folks from around New Haven and across the world, to tonight's Black History Month event featuring Professor Margo Okazawa-Rey. I want to first acknowledge the Quinnipiac Nation, upon whose land Yale has built this university for students and our community campus to learn, work, and grow. For when we acknowledge the traditional land that we stand on, we remember and we honor our forebears, our elders, and our connection to the earth. And we recognize a longer and richer story that informs our present and shapes our future. I want to thank our planning committee for their support of this evening's event: Sophia Lacuram, Lauren Bass-Sanford, Hajar Sami, Dean Joliana Yi, Min Vu, and Lillian Hua. The House and the AACC are so grateful to our co-sponsors at Yale, including the Department of African American Studies, the Chaplain's Office, the Center for the Study of Race, Indigeneity, and Transnational Migration, the Office of LGBTQ Resources, the Yale Alumni Association, the Yale Black Alumni Association, the Yale African American Affinity Group, the Asian Network at Yale, Diversability at Yale, and the Yale Latino Networking Group. Before I introduce our student moderator, who will in turn welcome our featured guest, I wanted to talk a little bit about tonight's theme. As we were thinking about a theme for this year's Black History Month keynote, we were feeling needful for a brighter future, for the world to open back up and to feel like we have the ground under our feet again. We were dreaming of Black futures. And we know that our dreams are influenced by our days, our present, and our past. We know that we can use dream work to work out our demons of our past and our present to create new futures. And we have had to fight this year, all year, to convince people that Black lives matter. At a minimum, Black lives matter. Today is the 1-year anniversary of the brutal killing of Ahmaud Arbery. And it seems so long ago that we were in the streets together fighting for justice for him, for George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, and countless others. We are vigilant, and we are ever vigilant, beyond resilient. And we will not stop saying Black lives matter. All Black lives matter. But we are tired, and sometimes we wonder what Black futures would look like with the solidarity of people who understand how race, class, gender, sexuality, ability, citizenship, and so many facets of identity are tied together in this world and in the struggle for peace, equity, and justice. In considering our futures, we are right to look to the wisdom of our past, to our histories. We thank Dr. Margo Okazawa-Rey for her work that has paved the way for so many of us to carry on this fight. Now, speaking of hard work, I do want to say that we have an amazing team of phenomenal Black women who are running tech support behind the scenes, including yours truly, but you likely won't see all of us, so I do want to publicly recognize Sophia Lacuram, who serves as the Assistant Director of the Afro-American Cultural Center at Yale, and Hajar, a student assistant for our center's intercultural and social justice programming. Thank you for your work tonight. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Lillian Hua. Lillian is a senior majoring in ethnicity, race, and migration, and she represents Silliman College and Chi-Town. So lovely. So Lillian, I'm going to pass it to you. Thank you for introducing tonight's guest of honor.
Thank you, Dean Nelson, for your incredible introduction and for your constant light and leadership every day, all the time. Hi, everyone. My name is Lillian. I hope everyone is having a wonderful Pisces evening tonight. And I, in particular, am so grateful tonight to have the opportunity to be introducing our guest. So Dr. Margo Okazawa-Rey, Professor Emerita of San Francisco State University, is an activist and an educator working on issues of militarism, armed conflict, and violence against women examined intersectionally. She has long-standing activist commitments in South Korea and Palestine, working closely with Duribong, aka My Sister's Palace, My Sister's Place, and Women's Center for Legal Aid and Counseling, respectively. She is a founding member of the International Women's Network Against Militarism, Women for Genuine Security, and the Combahee River Collective. Most recently, Professor Okazawa-Rey was the Barbara Lee Distinguished Chair in Women's Leadership and Visiting Professor of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies and Public Policy at Mills College in Oakland, California. And she also serves on the International Advisory Board of Durebang and Ujeongbu, South Korea, the International Board of Peace Women across the globe in Bern, Switzerland, and the Board of Directors of Association for Women's Rights and Development. She was also board member and co-chair of Highlander Center in Newmarket, Tennessee. And some of her recent publications include Nationizing Coalition and Solidarity Politics for U.S. Anti-Militarist Feminists, Social Justice, Gendered Lives, Intersectional Perspectives, No Freedom Without Connections, Envisioning Sustainable Feminist Solidarities, and I could actually just keep going on because her canon is actually so prolific, but I'm excited to instead turn it over to Dr. Okazawa-Rey herself. So without further ado.
Yeah, thank you, everyone who made this possible. I'm just truly honored to be here. I just have been thinking a lot about this talk, thinking a lot about what's happening in the world around us. And I was kind of bowled over by your 6 categories of questions. I'll do my best. I just want to start by quoting Septima Poinsett Clark. And if you don't know who she is, Google her. She says, "I have a great belief in the fact that whenever there's chaos, it creates wonderful thinking. I consider chaos a gift, as do I." In this year of what I think about as a syndemic, not just a health crisis, but a whole socio-political crisis, I think it's an amazing opportunity. And so it's in that spirit I'm here to be with you all, to listen to you, most of all, answer some questions. And I also want you to think about the following questions as we go into the conversation together. And my first question is, what's the future you want to create? What's the world you want to create? That's one. And you, I'm speaking collectively, obviously. So I should probably say, what is the world we are working to create? And the second related question is, who do we have to become to live in it, to thrive in it, to help that world, those communities within it thrive, right? And not mess it up. Right? We've been in these situations where doing these rad things, and then there's an implosion because we don't know how to act, right? We don't know how to love. We don't know how to treat each other. And so we end up reproducing the same contradictions and the same hierarchies, the same tensions, except with different bodies doing that. And then on a more micro level, I'd also like you all to think about, how do you know your worth? How do you know your value? What are the markers for it? Is it that you get A's at Yale University, or is it something else? Is it that you make a difference for people in your lives, that you are being of service? So what are your markers? I also think about, especially in these days, where things seem really terrible, and for many people in the world, they are, right? And some of us, it might be some of us in this evening together. I also want you to think about what gives you energy, like what energizes you, what gives you joy, right? What makes you want to dance, and ultimately, what makes you really want to love life and love people. And so, and the last question is, I keep generating these questions, but the last question is, what makes something radical? What makes something revolutionary? What makes us radical and what makes us revolutionary? And what does it mean to be a person who's committed to a life of radical imagination, radical revolutionary ways of being in the world? So those are just some of my opening comments, and then let's just get right into the conversation. And thank you very much again for your generosity, your hospitality, and I'm just delighted, truly delighted to be here and to let me be your DJ.
Thank you so much, Professor Okazawa-Rey. I really love those questions, so thought-provoking and things like that. So definitely want to get into the conversation, like you said. We have, like you said, kind of a lot of questions.
You do. I mean, they're deep questions. They're not lightweight questions.
Yeah, so we have some folks from some of our different res groups. So we're going to start off with Hajar, who is a member of YBWC, the Yale Black Women's Coalition. So
and before we start, may I ask you one favor, which is just, chat it up in the box. And then if you all could save it and just send it to me so I can really read through them and get a sense of your thinking. I would love that. That would be a wonderful gift.
No problem.
So thank you so much, Dr. Okazawa-Rey, for being here again and having this very important conversation with us. I just wanted to start by asking a question about the Combahee River Collective. So after reading its statement, I was most struck by the sense of community, joy, and relief the members found within the collective. One part of the statement specifically that really resonated was, we did not have a strategy for organizing or even a focus. We just wanted to see what we had. The overwhelming feeling that we had is that after years and years, we had finally found each other. So could you please just talk about the impact the collective had on you personally and on your journey as an activist, specifically how finding a Black and women of color feminism and a community centered around these ideals, what that specifically means for you?
Okay. So you're going to make me cry. One thing that's really clear, and I want to make clear, is that we were not out to make history, right? There was so much joy in that we found each other, and that what we were trying to do in a really fundamental way is discover who we were at the time, to say that women like us exist, right? Because we were not supposed to exist. We were not visible anywhere. And there was a really huge deal for us to have been out publicly, right? Like that. And not only, in terms of our sexuality and sexual orientation, but out as socialists, anti-imperialists, all the things that were important. And not just the parallel categories, but that we embodied all those things, right? So there were anti-imperialists at the time. That was a really important part of the political movements and so forth. So I just want to say that we were never an organization in the ways we think about organizations. We're not a nonprofit. We were not even formal, right? We had a series of about 8 retreats through which we did the theorizing, and all of us were activists before Combahee was even, there. So what Combahee did for me that no other formation up to that point was able to do was give me what I think about as a holding environment, right? That is, I was being held and I was holding the rest of us as we talk through our identities. What did it mean to be X, Y, or Z? What is our places in the world, or what are our roles in the world, right? How do we continue the activism that all of us were engaged in? Everything from organizing against the forced sterilization of Puerto Rican women. I was involved in the desegregation of schools movement in Boston at the time, which was huge. It was very violent, right? And in other ways. So there was both a kind of excitement and a little bit of arrogance, I had to say, as well as a kind of humility in us, being together. It was humbling. So what that did was, in the longer term, almost 50 years later, right, to say that the critical things about, being together, one is, of course, joy. We cook together, bake cookies together, all kinds of stuff. And serious studying together, that we knew that not one perspective of any one single person in that group would enable us ever to come up with complex understandings of the world, right? We didn't have the word intersectionality, right? That became a formal term once it got published in the academy, but that's what we were talking about in its essence, right? In its essence and its textures. So it made me realize as an academic that people know things, people know life, even though they don't have a word for it, right? And that as academics, we're trained to say that if there isn't a word, then that thing doesn't exist. And if you're a positivist, something doesn't exist until you can prove it in certain empirical ways. I knew from the experience with the Combahee River Collective that women's lives, in that context, we were talking about women, but everybody's life has an epistemology, right? Is rooted in epistemology. And so we have to think about ways of knowing, the construction of knowing in a really completely attached to people's experiences. And we also need the capacity to abstract, right? To generalize to other situations so that we're not coming up with essentialist ways of understanding our lives, right? And I just want to make one thing clear about that statement. When we said, when Black women are free, everybody would be free, we were not saying we were the most oppressed. Because if you read around that, you'll see that we were talking about structures and institutions. And for us to be free, those had to be transformed. And if we transform those, then other people would also have a shot at liberation. Does that answer the question? I feel like I was just kind of rambling on a little bit there. Just stop me if I'm going off, right? Or if you're not understanding what I'm saying, please.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. So now I think we're going to pass it to Min.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much, Professor Okazawa-Rey, for your reflections on the Combahee River Collective and the importance of community and joy in our organizing work. In addition to your reflections as an activist, I'm wondering if you could speak more about your scholarly, political, and personal orientation as a transnational feminist. What does the term transnational do for feminism, and what does it sort of entail or look like? Why is it important to decenter the US nation state in our ongoing studies of gender, sexuality, race, and power in general? And lastly, how does one work through the possible contradictions of practicing and studying transnational feminism while being based in the United States?
Okay. These are wonderful questions. I'm so excited. Okay, so I'm going to start with what you sort of ended with, this whole idea of contradictions, right? And I encourage all of us to embrace those contradictions. Don't act like they're not there, and think about, when does a contradiction, living with a contradiction, make us hypocrites? Right? It's one thing to live with contradictions. It's another thing to be hypocritical. The Combahee River Collective, there were lots of internal contradictions, all of that, right? So it's important to think about contradictions as things that don't quite fit together or they oppose each other. But in that opposition or that not fitting together, there's always a space for radical possibilities, right? And that's how I want you to think about contradictions, and then you can do with it whatever you want, but I want to start there. The next thing I want to say, one of the contradictions is all of us in this rooms, the Zoom room, you know, being attached in one way or another to the US state and the significance of that. The thing about being attached to a dominant category is that we often don't have to see what's happening below, right? So the people in, you know, if you think about a hierarchy, the people on the lower end of things, the downs are able to see the ups, but the ups are not looking down, if you see what I mean, right? So sometimes we in subordinated positions can see more about people above us than they can about, you know, we know more about them than they know about us. You know, the classic kind of saying, you know, what Sigmund Freud is apparently say, you know, what do women want? Well, pay attention and you know, right? And it's the same for us as people connected to the US state. It's interesting how we talk about race, class, gender, nation, sexuality, like all in one word, you know, disability as if it's one, but nation is not included. And what that means for us in the US is really to get two things. And I'll give two examples. The way certain things travel, right? Kind of unilaterally, one directional from the US to other places, and it kind of fans out. A really good example of that is, do you think anybody would care about murdered Black people, you know, or state violence against Black people, if the news were not coming, if the movement was not coming out of the US? Think about all the murdered Black folks on this planet. How much do we know about them, right? So that's the whole thing about traveling. The other thing about nation I think is absolutely critical is that we hardly know what impacts what the impacts of, for example, the US military and all the places where it exists. And there are about over 700 US bases around the world on every continent, right? And we hardly know, unless you know people there, or unless you go to some of these webinars where they're talking about it, we don't know because we don't have to know, right? It's happening over there. So one of the questions is, how do we think about here and there? And how do we make those connections? And then we can't just say, we're good Americans, you know, or we're good people opposing the US state, right? It's like, that's like what white people say to us, people of color, right? I'm a good white person, you know, I have a good person of color as a friend, you know, and we sometimes say the same things. You know, I have a good Indian friend, you know, she lives in India and she tells me about good Indian food or something. Anyway, I'm being silly here, but you get the point. We cannot simply say we oppose the state, so therefore we don't have to really, you know, think about it. One of the big questions for us is, what does it mean to be responsible and accountable? Or let me phrase it differently. What are our responsibilities as folks, progressive folks, folks committed to social, economic justice, all the kinds of justice work that we're doing, and to be connected to the US state, right? For what then should we be responsible, right? And then to whom should we be accountable when we're thinking about the responsibility is folks connected to the US state. Also, tell me if I'm speaking too quickly, just for the interpreter. I'm part of this international network of Women Against Militarism. I do lots of work in other countries, right? And one question always is, how do I enter those places, right? In South Korea, which just completely set me off on this amazing trajectory, you know, I initiated that, right? I applied for Fulbright because I wanted to understand what Korean people learned about African Americans before they came to the US. And at the time, there were all these tensions and conflict, between Korean immigrant merchants and African American communities. So I thought, so what did they learn? Well, the learning was really on my part, right? Because it was there. I was standing in the middle of Seoul and seeing the huge US Army base. And I was thinking, wow, there's no way that there would be a foreign US base in Washington, DC, right? That's what it means to be an imperial power. And the other thing is that I can speak Japanese. I couldn't speak Korean, but I could talk with the older generation of Korean people who had been colonized by Japan, Japanese Imperial Army, and had to learn to speak Japanese. So here I am in the middle of Seoul, a base on the one side, and speaking Japanese to older Korean people, right? Talk about contradictions. And here I am, a good person of color from the US, right? And so the point I'm trying to make is that around this question of nation, we have to think about how, first of all, how do we become aware of it, right? That we're in this structurally privileged place, right? When it comes to that category. And we also, embody these other things. My entry into Palestine, right? All the other entries were invitations. I was invited to come, right? And so then you have to think about, what does it mean to be a guest? And what does it mean to be a guest related to the person who invited you? What are the responsibilities to that person, right? As well as other responsibilities that we carry as somebody from the United States. And something I learned both in Korea and in Palestine, more recently in the last 15 years, is how do I listen? How do I listen when you don't speak the language, right? And what am I listening for, right? And something I learned is that it's possible to listen with our hearts. And especially as an English speaker, that we need to be quiet, right? We need not to talk. And what does that mean, right? For us to voluntarily not speak out of respect, right? Out of humility. And so those are the kinds of things. And I think the work ahead of us, the work in front of us right now, has to be transnational, right? It has to be about connecting the dots, meaning connecting the forces that shape our existence, shape the conditions, right? And not just look at the bodies, the affected bodies, but to look at the processes that are producing certain kinds of outcomes, right? And impacts. Although the bodies look different, right? That's what I think means to be radical, to get to the root of the processes and the structures and formations that transcend national borders, right? And also to recognize that the elites in every location have more in common with each other than they do with the other people in their own locations, right? So what I, began to think about is how the elites lock arms, right? And they're kind of holding it together and they're getting richer and richer and more powerful, right? And we're looking horizontally at each other and blaming each other, right? This is what a lot of these horizontal, horizontal hostilities are about. And so I want us to really think about accountability, responsibility, because no matter what, along the line of nation, we are in structurally powerful positions. You have a blue passport, it's going to take you lots of places that other folks can't.
Thank you so much, Professor Okazawa-Rey.
I'm not paying attention to the chat, so if something interesting comes up that's off cue, off the script, call it in. And also tell me if I'm just like not making any sense or something also, because I don't want to embarrass Joliana and those of you who invited me.
Yeah, I think, everything you said made a lot of sense, and more sense than I've ever understood transnationalism. So I really appreciate that. So next we're going to pass it to Avik, who's representing Queer and Asian, or Q&A.
Thank you so much, Professor Okazawa-Rey, for being here with us today. I just have learned already so much from everything that you said, and I'm so excited to hear more. You've talked about your experience with organizing on a transnational scale around issues of militarism, imperialism, and other kind of structures of domination and subordination. And so on the note of political organizing, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you conceive of the relationship between theory and practice in your work, which of course is a bit of a cliche at this point. But I guess my question is whether you could reflect a little bit on what it means to conduct this kind of work within the academy, to participate in struggles, feminist and anti-racist struggles within institutions that have these long histories of participation in and complicity with colonialism, capitalism, and white supremacy, and how you sort of approach being in this difficult position of taking on and participating in these struggles while also existing within these oppressive institutions.
Mm-hmm. So I'll start with a question. The question is, where do you want to be when the stuff hits the fan? I'm not using the bad word because it's being recorded, right? When the stuff hits the fan, where do you want to be standing and with whom? I think that's the place to start for me, right? Is that, first of all, I got my doctorate, I started my doctorate when I was 32. So I'd already been grounded in community work in the Boston area, for at that point, 10 years, right? Combahee River Collective, I did the school desegregation work. I worked with, quote, bad teenagers in Boston, in Roxbury and Dorchester. And so I was already grounded in community, there was a place I was already a part of. So when I went to the doctoral program, I wasn't taken in, The thing about Harvard is the farther away from Harvard you are, the more people think it's all that, right? Probably similar to Yale, right? Having said that though, I was in that elite institution, right? But what that did for me was, and probably because I already had another career before that, it was seductive, right? To be part of it. It was alluring, but I wasn't taken in. Do you know what I mean? Like I wasn't convinced that the emperor had clothes on, just because of my past experiences. And I remember thinking, you know, at my orientation, thinking, oh my goodness, I looked around, maybe there were 3 people of color, and then there was white woman, lesbian, you know, there was this little group of people who were outsiders. And, you know, my friend Sandy, who's the white lesbian woman, said, and I looked at each other and said, oh my goodness, you know, listen to all these smart people. They were quoting this one and that one. And we said, well, what if we don't graduate? And my biggest fear was to end up an ABD, you know, all but dissertation. And ironically, at the end of it, the 2 white guys who were such hotshots in that orientation group, it took them much longer to finish than we did. And being inside these elite institutions, I think helps us see the contradictions within those institutions and the ways in which, you know, they're held up to be so valuable and worthwhile. But when you're inside them, you say, wait a minute, you know, this is the hype part. So one example of that was, I was on the editorial board of the Harvard Educational Review, and there these articles would come in. Before then, I thought to have something published, it had to be perfect. Like how you read it published, I thought was how you had to present it. Otherwise, nothing was going to get published. Well, being on the editorial board, I saw things that came in that were junk, to be honest, right? And I thought, wait a minute, so how do these people have these big names? Because we made them look good, right? And when you're in elite positions, other people make us look good, right? It's not to say that we're not smart, that we don't work hard, you know, but there are these other institutional factors. And I think once you get that, once you really internalize that, you begin to think about, okay, who are my people? And if your allegiance is with the university, then you're sunk, to be honest, because we're all expendable. Every institution, the people are expendable. You know, if we're not there, somebody else will be there, right? But that's also the thing that creates the dynamic that is the undoing, right? Competition. We know there's limited spots and we're going to be competing. And, you know, ironically, we're competing against people like ourselves, right? Because there's some white people who are very mediocre, right, in these institutions, but they're thought by definition to be smart, et cetera, and we by definition thought to be mediocre, or we just got in because of affirmative action, right? And a lot of times it's the other way around, right? And so I started with the question of how do you know your worth? How do you assess your worth? That's the starting place for being in the institution. The other is, for me, being in the institution was an inside-outside strategy. That is, being in the institution to leverage the resources to really support and accompany the communities I was a part of, not the other way around. You know, I didn't go out collecting data from the community to enhance the reputation of the university, right? I used office spaces, Xerox machines. There were Xerox machines at the time. That was a really important thing, right? It's less important now in this digital age, but whatever the resources were, you know, to leverage them to support community activism and so forth. Right? And I realized, and this is over the years, right, that be clear about what your purpose is in life. Be clear about that. And organize your work around that. If we're lucky enough to get paid to do that, wonderful, right? If we're lucky enough to get tenure to do that, great, right? Recognize though that sometimes you're going to be in a fundamentally contradictory position. And the question is, what is your red line? Right? At what point are you going to say enough? And the thing about that, and thing about being ethical, is that often the red line doesn't appear as clearly as we think they would, right? So think about all the little compromises you made, right? Okay, well, next time I'll do this. And I remember when I was in pre-tenure, I remember my colleagues talking about, well, when I get tenure, I'm going to be more outspoken, right? That was literally said, but in other ways too. I can't really mentor this student because the person who's giving them a hard time is a senior faculty member, right? And so they look like little things, but the thing about being ethical and unethical is that we become unethical, right? That our ethics are a little bit shaved off, a little bit at a time, right? Because all of us in these rooms, in this Zoom room, if we were faced with some straight up ethical dilemma, I know that we would end up on the right side. I know that, I'm sure about that. That's what I guess, that you're even in this conversation. That's not the problem. The problem is the everydayness of the compromises, the everydayness of the ethical kind of hemming and hawing that 20 years, 30 years later, you wonder to yourself, wow, how did I get here? Right? And that's the thing that I want you all to pay attention to every day, along with everything else you're doing, you know, to really pay attention to how are my ethics, how are my politics, how are my loyalties being chipped away, right? Or in what ways are we continuing to shore up those bonds, strengthen the bonds with people with whom, you know, we're related, right, in all kinds of ways, right? In other words, to whom are we individually accountable and responsible? And that goes to the responsible and accountability question that I mentioned earlier when we were talking about nation, right? And it's living with contradictions, particularly if you are in certain, hold certain political perspectives, right? So for example, Cornel West just came out with something that said, even with his stature, right? When he speaks, he can talk about everything, imperialism, capitalism, white supremacy. When he talk about Palestine, boom, right? That's what I mean. Liberal institutions also have a place where their liberal ideologies end, right? And you see what the bottom line for them is, you know, what their red line. Another long-winded answer, sorry. I think we have about 3 more questions to go. Just tell me if I'm going off, okay, please. I'm not, yeah.
I think, yeah, that's really, I never even want to stop you, honestly, because you're making so many good points. But this next one is going to be our last question, and it's from Marty Kovacs. So I'll have her come on up. This virtual sitting.
Hello, and thank you so much for, yes, everything that you've said so far. I think it's really
Are you related to Curtis Rooks?
Yes, he's my dad.
Oh, okay.
But yes, hi. Well, I guess, so you know a little bit about me then.
No, I don't know anything about you. I know about your dad.
Mainly just in that, as I am also someone who is mixed race Black and Japanese, there's no question that our communities have a long and complex history of solidarity. However, we see a lot that Black and East Asian communities more broadly are also frequently pitted against each other by white supremacy, these horizontal tensions that you're mentioning. And so particularly during this moment of increased anti-Asian violence during COVID-19 and the continuing struggle for Black lives and the ways in which these things have very complexly intersected, how do you personally navigate these joys and tensions on a daily basis of being part of these communities, which I think really fits into the everyday that we're talking about here?
Yes, the everydayness of it, right? It's not the grand gestures, right? It's not the huge proclamations. It's not hanging a banner in your house or whatever you do to show solidarity, but it's the everyday practice of being there for each other, right? And by each other, I mean in a singular way, but also in a collective way, right? How do we every day practice? How do we every day be the solidarity that we say we're about, right? And all solidarities have kind of a checkered history, right? Because there are often these power differences and structural inequalities, right? And one of the ways that Asian Americans have been pitted against other peoples of color in particular, of course, is that the whole model minority myth, right? They're the good minorities, and you, the rest of you, particularly Black and Brown and Indigenous people, you're the bad ones, right? And once we come to recognize that is the way, that one profound way, deep way that happens, is our road to generating more ethical solidarities, dependable solidarities, and the solidarities have to go both ways. I was in this conversation 2 weeks ago when there were these Japanese American elders talking about reparations. And they were talking about, they didn't have the courage to stand up, most of them didn't. Of course, there were the No-No boys and all these other ones, small group. And they said they got the courage to speak up for themselves because they learned from the Black civil rights movement, right? These were people in their 90s talking about this, right? And so how do we think about genealogies? How do we think about our connections to other movements? Right? And how do we think about mutuality, right? And how do we do it in a way that's really purposeful, not just knee-jerk? Oh, Black people want us to do this, then we Asian Americans better do it, right? Or Asian Americans want us to do this, we Black people better do it, right? But thinking about what are the essential principles of being in solidarity? What are the essential principles that guide us so that we are in ethical solidarity, and also that it's not instrumental solidarity, tit for tat. I do this for you and you do this for us, right? So that kind of solidarity, I believe, has to be built on vision, right? Vision of what we're trying to create that transcends any body of category, a category of people that recognize the histories, right, of all the groups who are in this movement, right? So for example, the history of the United States is told from the East, right? What would happen if the telling of the history started from the West of the country, right? You would have a different understanding of race dynamics, everything. And then you figure out spaces where we can come together and tell the stories, of both sides of the continent, and from the South and from the North, right? Instead of just one starting place, right? And so looking also beyond the borders of the US and saying, oh, wow, those Okinawans were in solidarity with the African-American soldiers who were stationed there during the Vietnam War, while the Okinawan people were fighting, because they're colonized people too, fighting against the Japanese state, and Black people were opposing the US war in Vietnam, right? There are those examples as well. So part of knowing the history is knowing the history of connections, not just betrayals. And this goes when we're talking to white people too, right? Is how do we recreate, remember, right? That is do again, member, connect, membrane, right? How do we reconnect the histories? How do we reconnect our pasts, right? And this whole model minority thing didn't just start with Asian Americans, right? It started with the five civilized tribes who were recognized as the model indigenous people, right, down there in Florida, because they did things that the colonizers thought were good things to do, right? Be entrepreneurial, hardworking, all that kind of stuff. So how do we deal then with the politics of scarcity? Because all these struggles are also about resources, and I don't mean just material, right? You've been in these conversations where we think even recognition is scarce, or even space to talk about trauma is scarce, right? So we're fighting about who's more traumatized than somebody else, right? And so how do we create spaces that are generative, right? Where we're visioning together, right? Not just Black and Asian, right? Or African American and Asian American, for example, but that we're really trying to get to the roots of what caused the problems in the first place, what's at the heart of the oppression. And I absolutely am convinced now, after all these decades, that one of the biggest tasks in front of us, right, is deepening relationships, getting to know each other. And I don't mean just one-on-one, but collectively, getting to know each other one-on-one, as well as collectively, right? And because that so much of what we do is about tasks, right? Get something done and do it quick, McDonald's mentality, drive up window, get your food, eat quickly, and then we're supposed to be satisfied. Well, you know that even if you like McDonald's food, it's not really satisfying, right? It satisfies some immediate thing, but it doesn't sustain you over the long haul. So the questions are, what kinds of relationship will sustain us over the long haul, until we get to at least partway to the place where we're trying to get to, right? So that's about relationship building. It's about love, love of life, love of each other, even if you don't like them, in the moment, right? You know how you don't like some people, just get on your nerves, but you love them, right? That's what it means. And recognizing ultimately, and I said this the other day, is what would happen if we really truly internalized the idea that we share a common destiny with all peoples and all living things on this planet? How would that shape how we move forward? And if we believed that what we did has 7-generation impacts, as our indigenous wisdom keepers tell us. And then it's very practical. You figure out how to work together. You have to be candid, you have to be honest, and small apologies, right? Little apologies go a long way, so that after 3 months of organizing together, you're still pissed off at somebody who misnamed you or, something, but you didn't talk about it. So one part of it is it takes a lot of courage. There's no such thing as a safe space. What we're trying to do is create courageous spaces where we're willing to take risks, take chances, to keep loving over and over again, and to keep trying, and to be honest, right? Because we have a shared vision.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those words and for all of your thoughts today so far. I'm going to send it back to Min now.
Yeah, thank you so much to Lauren for facilitating that student Q&A section, and to you, Professor Okazawa-Rey, for your generous and insightful responses. We wanted to open up the discussion to questions from the audience. So I'll just be reading from some of the prompts in the Q&A box and from the chat. So one question we have from Trin Nguyen is, quote, "You mentioned reflecting on what makes us want to dance. How do you approach curating your playlists as DJ More Love and Joy?"
So it's completely participatory. So we have, I DJ a transnational feminist dance party on Thursdays. And on Wednesdays, this will be tomorrow, I send an email to everybody saying, okay, remember, it's tomorrow's our dance party, and invite everybody, anybody. We have babies coming, children coming. The oldest person is in her 80s, and one of my former professors may show up one week. Harvard professors may show up one week. I send out a note, and then I say, please send songs that you want to hear, dance songs. No bad words, because we have children, right? So we have to do a little censorship here. What we've done since April is dance together every week, not always the same people. I say to people, come as you are. You don't even have to dance. Come as you are. You don't even have to turn on your camera. Just share the space with us and give us your energy, right? Let's do an energy exchange. And what's the most wonderful thing is that, so for example, I have Cookie, right? When I pull out Cookie to start dancing, everybody brings out their stuffed animals or their pets or something. And it helps us to be real, right? And it helps us to be silly and play together. We've done this since April. It'll be a year in a couple of months, right? And what it's also done is it's helped us be together across borders. So I'm the farthest out, and there's somebody else from a couple of other people from California, but then there's somebody from Kentucky, New York, Washington, and then we jump across, and somebody, some people from Johannesburg, and then people from the UK, people from Austria, Germany, Switzerland, right? And we have people as far away from California as Islamabad in India, and we have people from Palestine, right? And so it's an amazing space, right? And I did not used to be a dancer. I was too self-conscious to be a dancer. I thought I couldn't dance. I thought I didn't have rhythm. I mean, all those things. It was only 2 years ago that got me started, and it was an intergenerational moment. My friend Mie, who is a friend now, was a student at Pitzer College. She came to visit me in the Bay Area at Thanksgiving, and she played Shakira. And I completely fell in love with Shakira music. Talk about an intergenerational moment. Somebody told me later, well, she's old school, I'm like, really? I'd never heard of her. But anyway, then it got me moving my body. And I thought, oh, I just, move to the music, right? And then it just kind of built up, right? And so one thing about doing this kind of, whatever the political work is, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to play the wrong song. You're going to send the song that has the cuss words that you don't necessarily want the kids to learn right now, at age 7, right? But it's all in the learning. And I think in this particular moment, people want to be connected in whatever ways we can, because many of us are feeling lonely, isolated. And this was before COVID, by the way, you all know that, right? COVID just made everything kind of speeded things up and made things explicit. So, and I'm 71 years old, right? I don't care what people think about me, to be honest, right? As far as, oh, she's not a real professor, look, she's just out there dancing, or she's not a real activist, she's just talking about love and joy. I don't care about those things. There was a time when I would have cared what people thought about me. But I think what's important is to know, you come to know your worth and your value by the company you're keeping, right? So when my little niece, who I call my niece now, Yasmin, says to me, she loves me, right? She's 13 years old. I've known her since she was about 7. Right? Then I know that's what I want to hear, that I'm doing right by somebody, right? Not the senior tenured professor here at X institution, right? It's when somebody like Juliana invites me and I say, yes, I'm saying yes to your invitation, not because it's Yale, but my psychic told me this year, say yes to every invitation, right? Do you know what I mean? I'm being goofy, right? So try to get out of those boxes and do what makes you joyful. And see what happens. See what happens. You might fall and make a fool of yourself, but then you might find something that's extraordinary. For me, this dance space that we've created over these last 10 months. And it's brought together amazing people and we've learned. And then after a while, we started reserving the last 10 minutes just to check in. Before it wasn't chatting, checking in, right? And then every week, if there's a celebration, like a couple of weeks ago, I did a Chinese New Year playlist and invited people to send songs, any kind of songs from that part of the world. This week, somebody mentioned Pisces. It's going to be a Pisces party, right? So, and I think we do that, but just by paying attention, right? We can't read people's minds, but we can pay attention and recognize what matters to them. Recognize what matters to them. And also know that we are transformed by being forthcoming. It's not just that we're giving things away, whatever it is, but that we're gaining, we're being transformed, all of that. So it's always reciprocal when you stand in an authentic place as who you are and you come as you are. Right? Sometimes we have to perform, right? When we have to deal with the BS, right? But don't you become the BS that you're performing.
Thank you so much. Our chat was bursting with excitement and desire to join that weekly transnational dance party. So if you want to drop that invitation link, Professor.
No, I'm not going to drop the invitation, but I will drop my email.
Yes.
And if you want to join, just hit me up, as you all say, hit me up. And I will put you on the email list and send you the note tomorrow.
Amazing. And after you do that, we have time for one more question. And this one is from Chantrice King, who asks plainly and beautifully, quote, what brings you joy?
You, Chantrice, and all the people who I meet. It's noticing the little things in everyday life. It's remembering my ancestors. I have what's called a butsudan, which is basically an altar, a Japanese altar. I hang out with Cookie. I've been sheltering in place with it, and it's noticing the little things, right? And being grateful, right? Being grateful for all the love that's in our lives, being grateful for the lessons we've been blessed to learn, being grateful for the connections, being grateful for the mistakes we've made, asking for forgiveness for people we've messed with. And I had a bad reputation in my 20s. You wouldn't want to have known me back then. But anyway, asking for forgiveness, right? And also being willing to forgive. Joy is everywhere. It really is. The thing that's growing. And at the same time, recognizing, right, that we are in super difficult times. Stop reacting to that, generate your joy. And for me, the joy comes from imagining possibilities, imagining being with my friends and family back in Palestine when, you know, it's time to travel. It's imagining being in Korea, as I was supposed to be in both of those places, right? So using our imagination to catapult us out of our own embeddedness, right? And embrace the possible, embrace each other. The fact that you all are together, the fact that this BHM is being organized so collectively, you know, is cause for joy and gratitude, right? The fact that you have deans, you know, supporting this kind of event, you know, all of it, right? Think about, do you lead with half full or half empty? That proverbial, you know, question, is the glass half full or half empty? I say it's both, right? It's a both and moment. And I don't know, I love people and I love life. That's why I like being here. And I gotta tell you, I was very nervous. You know, that imposter syndrome never goes away. Just so you're sure about that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much to our audience for these generative questions, and to Professor Okazawa-Rey for being in community with all of us. And to round out our keynote event, I just want to pass the mic to Juliana Yi, the Dean of the Asian American Cultural Center at Yale, who will bring us together with closing remarks.
It's hard to believe that our hour just passed by so quickly. Clearly, we have your psychic to thank for having you be here. Happy Year of the Ox. And, you know, I think everyone is so, yes, I love just so much joy and love that you spread, and so fitting that your DJ name is More Love and Joy. I think we have truly been healed, but also you've given us so much, and I know you've given me so much to think about and really reflect on as we continue to imagine new possibilities in a world that often makes it hard to imagine beyond what we see. So thank you for just spending your hour with us. It's been such an honor communicating with you in planning this, and also just having you here and learning from you. I know a lot of us will be coming back to this recording many times again to just remember everything that you said tonight. So, and thank you to our amazing students who generated those powerful questions, and to Travis, who has been such a champion, you know, signing for us this entire hour. So,
and can I just say one more thing?
Definitely.
This is a request, right? I talked a lot, and if you ever see me not behaving as I said, pull my coattail. Right? Remind me that I'm supposed to be living in a particular way. And I really mean that.
And I think you're reminding us that of the best way to live, which is with love and joy. So for all the attendees, we just want to remind you that 4 of our many attendees will have the opportunity to win a copy of one of 2 Professor Okazawa-Rey's books. So we will be in touch with you after the event. It will be a raffle, and hopefully you get a copy. If not, you should still go out and look for a copy and buy them for your own collection. So I want to also hand it off to Dee Nelson to close us out with a final reminder.
Yes. Again, thank you, Professor Okazawa-Rey, for your work, your wisdom, your light, your love, and your joy. We are going to pass on your email to our attendees. Just want to make sure that they all know the chat is like popping right now. So we'll pass on your email so that we can all keep the party going. And as we close out tonight's event, just wanted to remind you all that the Gilder Lehrman Center and the House, along with several campus partners, will be hosting a virtual student panel discussion on the Yale and Slavery Research Project this Thursday, February 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And I'm going to put the link in the chat so that you can register for that. Again, thank you everyone for joining us here tonight. And as always, we wish you more love and joy. Be safe. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks a
Travis.
lot.
Call it, you can call it.